Aloha and welcome to this experience in which we're going to add methods to the Digits app. Um, Methods are a really important concept in Meteor because they provide very important security related features. Without methods, what you end up doing is allowing the client to modify the database in arbitrary ways. And of course, that's generally not a good thing because you can't assume that your clients either know what the right way to modify the database is in all times or can be trusted to modify the database in only the right ways. So before starting this, and so by default, Meteor comes with this insecure package enabled, which is what we've been using in order to call, insert, and delete and update from within our client-side event code. What we're going to do in this WOD is remove the insecure package, which means that you can't call update and insert, or it won't succeed at any rate. You can call it, it just won't do anything. And then we'll fix things by using methods. And so it's very important that you kind of go through these guides. The tutorial is good as an introduction. The Meteor guide has a section on methods. It gets a little more complicated than what we're going to do fairly quickly, but it's good to look through. You may later on, as you get more experience with Meteor, want to try using like validated method and so forth. But we're going to use basically just a simple approach to methods, which is nonetheless, still quite adequate to improve security. You should be watching this before trying it because there's definitely a lot of new stuff here, and you'll just flounder around most likely if you try to do it without having seen what's going on. Okay, if you're switching around branches, make sure to do a Meteor reset and then reinvoke. I've just done that. And so, as you can see here, we've got our Meteor thing running. You can see here it's running, and shoots. Oops, I know why. Because we want to be here. So we're going to start the timer, and then we're going to create and switch to a branch called methods 1. So we're in master. We've merged the previous experience, and if we go to digits, and we're going to create a branch called methods 1. And then we're going to run Meteor remove insecure. So if we go here and Control C out of this, Meteor remove insecure. And we'll see how long this takes. May need to pause. I'm going to pause. Okay, that was just a few seconds. And then once we've removed it, we can do reinvoke our Meteor run command. And I will definitely pause for this because it might take a little bit. You don't need to wait around. So we're back, it's running. I don't stop the timer, just for you folks that want to make sure I'm not cheating here. And if we go to localhost, we refresh. The important thing to note now is that we can sign in with our default user. Okay, and then we can display the context. That's okay, but where we run into problems is if we try to create somebody new. So if we say, foo bar baz 808.956.3000 and baz at foo.com and hit submit, we don't actually get anybody. Okay, and if we do a control meta J here, what you can see is we get an error message from Meteor saying that the insert that we tried to run, so if we look at add contact, you can see right here, we tried to do a contacts.insert on that collection. Because we've removed the insecure package, the client can no longer manipulate collections directly. They can still display the contents of a collection, but it's like a read-only thing. That's why we can list we can see the list of our contacts, but because we removed insecure, we can no longer modify them. In order to fix that so that we can modify them, what we've got to do is use Meteor methods. Okay, so let's do that first. We're going to create an insert method, and the way we do that is we go into our API contacts.js, and we're going to say meteor.methods, and it's got this kind of syntax that looks a little funny like that, and need a semicolon, and we just need one space there, and then we have to import Meteor, so we'll say import Meteor from Meteor/Meteor. Okay, so now Meteor is defined, and then the method I've given you, and I'll copy it in, and then I'll explain how it works. So here's our first method, and the notion here, we have to do import check. So import check from Meteor/check. Okay. All right. So the idea here is that instead of that this is a method that will be run on the server side, we're going to call it, instead of saying context insert, we're basically going to call this Meteor method that is called contacts.insert, and this is a function which takes a contact, which we'll pass into it, and then Meteor asks that we call this check function to do basic validation on all arguments. So we're going to do that, even though later on in this method we're going to use a schema to actually do more fine-grained checking. The first thing we're going to do is make sure within this method that the user, that there is a logged-in user, and we check it this way, and that the logged-in user is equal to the owner field of this contact. So you can only add a method if you're logged in and if you've set the owner field of the contact appropriately. If that's not done, then we are going to invoke a Meteor error. Now another thing you could do is you could just set the owner field inside this method if you wanted to. That's another way to go. It's kind of, in a sense, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. The next line is we're going to, on the server side, recheck to make sure that this contact satisfies the schema that we've defined up here. Okay? And you may be asking yourself, well, geez, we just did that right here. Do we really need to do it again on the server side? And the answer is yes, you do need to do it on the server side, because there's nothing to prevent people from actually going into the console and calling meteor.call with an object that they've constructed themselves. So basically you need to think of it as we do the validation here as a way of enabling our form to get the error messages, find out about problematic fields and display an appropriate error message. But we have to do the validation again on the server side in order to make sure that the user hasn't used some other API, not our form, to try to send bogus data. Now I will say that seems like, boy, we're doing validation twice. That seems like a waste. Can't we do it once? The answer is yes, you can. If you use this Meteor package called validated methods, it's possible to set it up so that validation, Meteor will take care of making sure validation only occurs once. But since we're not using validated methods, we're just going to do it this way, which involves a little bit of copied code, but it's not too bad. In reality, until you've got lots and lots and lots and lots of users, doing validation twice doesn't really hurt. Okay, so let's go back to here. So I've defined this method, which, as I said before, is going to check to make sure that the user there is a user logged in and that the user is the same as the contact owner, and then does the validation. And if it's valid, it ends up on the server side doing this insert, which is legal on the server side, not on the client side anymore. Otherwise, it throws a Meteor error. Okay. So now what we have to do is call the contacts method, contacts.insert method in add contact page. Okay. And instead of doing so if we go back to add contact page.js, so right here, this is the problematic line. We can't do that anymore. And so we could imagine just doing this. I'll kind of show you the first way. So one thing we could do is we could comment this out and we could replace it by a call to meteor.call. Okay? And that almost works perfectly. Okay? The only problem here is that this is an asynchronous call, which means this code will be executed probably before this code ends up completing its run. And so the UI can be a little confused by this asynchronicity. And so what I recommend here, the way that you fix this is instead of having the meteor.call followed by these two lines of code, and they're going to run in kind of some kind of arbitrary order, what you can do instead is you provide a third argument to meteor.call, which is a callback. And the callback actually takes two arguments generally, but we're not using the result value, so I'm not putting that in here. So I'm only interested in whether I pass a function, so I'm passing a callback. It's a function that takes one argument, which will be supplied when there is actually an error. And if there is no error, which is what we expect to have happen almost all the time because we've already validated the schema here, so there's no reason this should actually fail. So in the case that there isn't an error, then we set the error messages to be false and we go to the home page, and this will run after the insertion has actually happened. So this is a way of just kind of guaranteeing that things occur in the appropriate order. That first we complete the insertion of this new contacts into the database and update that collection with the new contact, and then we run the code, we run this callback function, which essentially is going to call these two lines of code because we assume that there won't be errors. Okay. We could have an else clause and say if there is an error, then we do something else. But for simplicity's sake, here we're just assuming that errors are not happening. All right, so now check to see that we can do a new contact successfully. So if we go back to here, we notice that we're building the application. Meteor server is restarted. So you can go back to digits. And now we can go to add contact. Get rid of this for the moment. And we can say Josephine Fellows, Main Street, telephone 808-345-6666, Joe at fellows.com. We do a submit, and now we're getting this insert just the way we want. Okay? So good, part one. So we've got our add contact stuff happening correctly. The next thing is that I noticed that in the digit 7 I neglected to do something important, which is you notice in the add contact page we we set a variable to be the user meteor.user.id, and we add it to the contact object. I may have neglected to do that, so I'm just going to do that now, because otherwise things do not work. I'm so disappointed in myself that I did not do that. So I'm just going to make that little fix here. You might have already seen an updated version of this which has that. So if you already have the meteor field in there or the owner field in there, no worries. So let's go back here. So now what we're going to do is create a context.update method and invoke it within edit contact page.js. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting situation here, that with the case of a add contact, what we are replacing is this context.insert.newContact. So we only needed to pass a contact to our method. In the case of edit contact, there's actually, this is the line that we want to replace right here, and this line has two values that we need to pass into the method. We need to pass the ID of the contact that we're going to update, plus we need to pass this updated contact object. Okay, so how do we do that? And the way that we're going to do that is by something called destructuring arguments, and it's a pretty cool trick, because it's actually the case, right, that you only get kind of a single argument to pass to a method, so you have to somehow combine together both those parameters that we need for edit contact into that single call. Okay, so let's see how we do that. Let's go back to contacts.js. And a lot of this is going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to basically start off by just making a copy of this and paste it in. And then we're going to say contacts.update, and then update, and then this is going to take, instead of just a single argument, we're going to have it take a object which has two fields in it: an underscore ID field, which is the underscore ID of the contact that we're going to update, plus the actual contact object. So now we have to check that underscore ID is of type string. Okay, and then we're going to make sure that that the owner's cool, and then we're going to check that the contact obeys the constraints of our schema, and then if it's okay, then what we're going to do is we go back to here and we see this context.update. We're going to invoke that. Going to invoke that exact same line, but we're going to edit it to use the arguments that we have. So instead of calling flowrouter.getParam underscore ID, what we can do is just use underscore ID and contact. Okay, so there you have it. That's what this method should look like, and it's a little interesting how this works. Okay, so with destructured parameters, what happens is I will invoke this method with an object that has two fields. One of the field's keys is underscore ID, and one of the field's keys is contact. And then, as part of the method invocation, it will destructure that object. So this is basically saying, hey, you're going to accept an object, and the key in that object, if there's a key underscore ID, I want you to bind this parameter to the value of that key value pair within the object that just got passed. Okay? Similarly, if there is a key called contact in this object, then bind the parameter contact to the value associated with that key in the object that's passed. Super cool, right? And in fact, this object could have other fields, you know, and since we don't reference them in this list of parameters, then, you know, those aren't bound to anything. Okay, so this is this really nice way of having a single parameter to a function, but you get multiple. I mean, you're passing a single object, but you're getting the effect of having multiple parameters in it. Okay, so that's our context.update function. And then the question is, how do we call it? And what we're going to do is we're going to do basically the same idea as here. We're going to do this meteor call. So we'll do propeller C, and then edit contact. So we'll just comment that out for the moment. And then we'll say meteor.call context.update. Okay, and so here what we're going to do is we're going to pass an object. And this is going to be an object that has an underscore ID field, which is equal to flow router get param ID. And it's going to have a contact field, which is going to have a value of new contact. I'm sorry, updated contact. Thank goodness for IntelliJ, which, you know, tells us when we're not referencing something. Okay? All right, so let's look at this again because it's such a cool idea. Meteor.call takes a string which represents the name of the method that's supposed to be invoked. The second argument is the argument to that method. This argument is going to be an object. This object has two key value pairs. One of the keys is underscore ID, and the value of that is the ID of the contact that we want to update. And then the second key value pair, the key is called contact, and the value of that is this updated contact object, which is this guy right here with the new values for first, last address, telephone. Then, just like with add contact, we have a callback which makes sure there's no error, then sets the error messages to false and goes to the home page. Okay? So remember, we're going to pass an object with two fields, an underscore ID and a contact field, and then over in our method, we destructure that object. Okay? We say we're going to bind the parameter underscore ID, which we're going to reference later, you know, in our method. We're going to bind that to the value of the field whose key is underscore ID within the object that just got passed. And similarly for contact, we're going to bind this parameter contact to the value of the field, key value, the field associated with the contact in the object. Okay? Alrighty, so let's see if that works. Anything else here? I think this looks good. So let's go back to edit contact page.js. We look at this. This seems good. And so if we go and wait for this to get built. Okay. We go to digits. So let's edit this. Make this Philip2. Call update. And now update works as well. Okay. So we've created contact. We've used destructured parameters. We've tested that it now can be updated. Now commit our changes to GitHub. There's all our changes. Finished adding methods. We'll call this, and we can check, I guess I say check to see that it's there. Methods 1. So we'll call this a 23-minute WAD. Now you know how to use methods. And again, the summary of it is that this ensures that clients that you as on the server side, where you have control over everything, you're able to make sure that what the client tries to do, to whatever modifications the client wants to make to your database, can be checked within the server, which is where you have total control over the environment, to make sure those changes are actually appropriate before doing it. Now again, Meteor has this idea called optimistic UI. You may have heard about it. What's cool about optimistic UI and about the way Meteor implements these methods is that it actually, when you invoke a Meteor method, so within the client, when we do this meteor.call, okay, you may think, oh, it's got to now go to the server and update the database, and then that stuff has to be propagated back to the client, and then in fact we'll see the database get updated. Well, if that's an expensive operation, or there's a lot of traffic or whatever, gosh, that's going to have an impact on the UI. So one little bit of black magic that Meteor does is, on the client side, when a client calls meteor.call with all this stuff, Meteor will actually update your local replication of the Mongo database immediately. Okay, so you will immediately see your thing updated. And it's called optimistic because Meteor assumes that 99% of the time when you try to do one of these things, it's going to work out fine in the end. Okay, and so it just goes ahead and updates your local database, which will refresh your user interface. And then, if it turns out on the server side that there was in fact a problem, then Meteor is able to kind of roll things back, within, I don't know, a second or 2 seconds, or whenever that server side invocation completes, to the way it actually needs to be. So that's this optimistic UI idea that Meteor is going to assume that whatever the client wants to do to the database is probably actually going to be okay. We'll make that update, and then only in the rare cases where the user actually tried to do something illegal will Meteor have to step in a couple seconds later and undo it. All right, there's that WOD. Hope you enjoyed it.